Let me introduce myself, but really, that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to be talking about building an inclusive tech lab today, but who am I? So my day job, I work at Mixer. Mixer. Yeah, Mixer has its own sign. They came from the community. I'm very proud of that. And I'm also the one heading up all of our accessibility efforts over there. At Xbox, we have a program called G-Free, and I'm also our Xbox Gaming and Disability Community Lead, which I'm very proud of. As Ian would put it, I'm the co-conspirator for the conference you're at. And before that, I came from AAA game development. So that's where most of my experience lies. But like I said, today we're going to be talking about the Inclusive Tech Lab. So what I have planned for us today is a mini tour of the lab, talk about how the lab came to be, what we learned while making the lab, and how you can go about and make your own. And for me, giving this talk is a little bit silly, because the true master of the lab is right over there. That's Bryce. So I'm basically just talking about his baby the whole time. But if you want to ask like real questions about the lab, go to that guy. All right, so you heard me mention before Gaming for Everyone. So Gaming for Everyone is a program that started within Xbox in 2015. It's actually why I chose to come work at Xbox. And it's about affirming Microsoft's commitment to making gaming an inclusive and fun environment for all groups of people. So we have community leads, such as myself, for gaming and disability, women in gaming, Latinx, LGBTQIA, and blacks in gaming. And for us, Gaming for Everyone is about building relationships with our customers, our colleagues, and our partners in the game industry. Through these relationships, we seek to better understand how to build safe, inclusive, representative, and accessible game experiences while, and this is something that's been touched on, while respecting developers' creative choices, which is key. Gaming for Everyone is about taking ourselves out of our comfort zone and looking at our products through a diverse set of lenses. And it was in that spirit that we created the Xbox Inclusive Technologies Lab. Now, normally when I give this presentation, I say, it's easy to forget that 10 to 15% of the world's population live with some form of disability, but you guys are at an accessibility conference, so you probably know that. But for a lot of game devs, it's actually really easy to forget. You know what, and as we just saw with the mobility panel we had earlier, those disabilities can vary in how greatly they affect your day-to-day lives, how you play, and all sorts of other factors. So first and foremost, our goal was to bring awareness to disability and how it can be a barrier to gaming sometimes, and how being excluded from gaming can have a significant impact on people's lives. Ultimately, it's not that game developers or platform developers don't care about people with disabilities. It's not that they are intentionally trying to exclude them. It's simply that most developers don't know that they are excluding people in the gaming and disability community, and they don't understand both the broad and deep impact that that exclusion can cause to an individual. Now, once people understand why game accessibility is important, the next step is educating them how to design inclusively. Now, to that end, we realized we needed a space dedicated to learning, a space where both developers and community advocates could come together and have idea-generating sessions, brainstorming on ways to make Xbox a more inclusive platform for everyone. And it would be a space to share both best practices and learn from mistakes. We really wanted a space that developers would leave energized, excited, educated, and ready to go back to their teams and share what they learned. We wanted them to come into this space and get pumped, because if they got pumped, they'd be excited to tell other people about it. Unfortunately, being crammed into tiny, small, sterile conference rooms, like you can sometimes find at Microsoft, isn't really, conducive to getting pumped. So, we needed something else. I'm gonna move this chair before I trip on it again. We needed a space that was comfortable, one that facilitated creativity, and one that really exemplified the spirit of inclusive design. We realized that building out a dedicated lab, we could not only ensure that it would meet all of our needed accessibility criteria, like having tables you can get food off of that aren't too high. I'm so sorry about that. But we could also use it as an embassy for the gaming and disability community, a place where they could feel at ease sharing their thoughts and feedback. Again, that was dedicated, that it was permanent. And hopefully, by building out such a space, we could demonstrate to the world that we were serious about being a leader in inclusive gaming, by literally putting our money where our mouth is. And with that being said, I want to go ahead and give you a mini tour of the Inclusive Tech Lab. So when we give the tour of the lab, we normally break it into 4 different sections, but the tour always starts in the same place. Our, what did you call it last time, Bryce? Not the inspiration wall, the context wall. So pretend that says context wall, okay? So what I have up on the screen is a photo of our context wall, which has a bunch of setups that Special Effect had developed for gamers with mobility impairments. And if the resolution was more clear, you'd be able to see that each one had a different setup. And so we've actually had a version of this since the very beginning, but I'll get into that later. For us, it's really important to have a constant reminder of what we're doing, who we're doing it for, and with these types of controllers, like I said, you can see there's a huge variety. For us, being able to see the solutions that these gamers were coming up with on their own lets us see the challenges, the unique solutions, the common solutions, and allow us to kind of think of ways to make it easier for these guys to be able to game. So, for example, a lot of the setups here were using multiple controllers that they were connecting together in some way. Well, what if Xbox, the platform, made that easier to do? Boom, Copilot. It's a system where you can take 2 controllers and have them as one input on the Xbox. So that was just one way we were able to kind of solve a problem that we saw by looking at their solutions. And so now, if you wanted to use 2 controllers, well, it's easier. You don't have to wire 2 together. There's one less warranty to void. As much as we can, how can we figure out how to do the heavy lifting for these guys? Now, directly across from the inspiration wall, or context wall, I need to update these slides, Bryce. I wish I would have done it last week. For us, we know that developers are problem solvers. And once they understand the problem, and they understand the challenges, they will come up with solutions. I think Cherry hit on the same thing. Like, they're creative people. We don't need to solve the problem. We need to show it to them. And with these demo spaces, we have the opportunity to show the developers what we're talking about. And sometimes showing people can be much more impactful than just trying to explain it. So on the screen, I'm showing 3 of the demos that we had back when it opened. And I'm saying that because we do switch them up. We do change them every now and then. But I wanted to talk about these. So on the left is the Quad Stick. It's a 3D printed puff and sip Kickstarter-backed controller. And it's fully operated with your mouth. And so for a lot of developers, they've just never seen something like this. In the middle, we have our eyes-free setup. So the black part folds down over the monitor, and the user is able to use the narrator to navigate, there we go, the Xbox and see what the technology we've built is like. And on the far right, we have our original Rocket League demo with a custom control setup. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. But all of these stations just give a lab guest a bunch of different ways to experience games. Now, the third area in the lab is actually a meeting space, because it wouldn't be Microsoft if you couldn't have meetings in it. And it has plenty of open chairs. The large monitor you see is actually a Surface touchscreen with a microphone and camera, so we can have remote meetings. And what's really great, by hosting meetings in this space, we're literally able to put attendees in a position where they are completely surrounded by accessibility and inclusivity. So our third-party hardware testing is actually off of this room. So when we're hosting meetings with a third-party or hardware developer, we do it in here. But that also means that the entire time this third party is talking to us, they are surrounded by our lab, and we've given them a tour. So that's like something fresh in their mind. You know, maybe it'll inspire these guys to think of something. And we also use this space for what we know at Microsoft as inclusive design sprints, where we will host subject matter experts and developers from different teams and just let them learn from each other. And hopefully, our developers get inspired and solve problems. We did one for Mixer, not last January, but the January before, and it was a great experience, and I was incredibly proud of my team. And the next area is actually called our living room space. So, you know, this is actually something that I think affects game development a lot. It's important to remember that the majority of console gamers don't play games sitting 3 feet from a computer monitor like we frequently develop. You know, they don't have headphones on. They're playing in their living room or bedroom or bro cave or whatever they have going on, right? You know, it's that 6 to 10 foot experience. And that's what we have set up here with some surround sound. Now, obviously, oh, you betrayed me, mouse. I just wanted to scroll. All right, obviously, when you sit further away from the screen, it is harder to see the detail and read the text. But beyond that, there are other environmental factors happening in a living room that could easily impact the way you game. Glare, lighting, background noise, your viewing angle, the acoustics of the room, there's so much happening. And all of these can make it more difficult to be able to play a game. And so the lab allows us to try out all sorts of room configurations. We have adjustable lighting and furniture that can easily be rearranged, and we're able to try to come up with solutions for the different type of issues that you might experience in a living room setup. We also use the space to test out the latest and greatest audio technology. So our current setup has a 4K 75-inch LG OLED TV. Had to read that directly off the screen because I mess it up if I try to do it from memory. And a 5.14 surround sound system, which sounds beautiful. So not only games look great and sound amazing with a setup, but experimenting with accessibility features using this sort of configuration has helped us think really creatively of how we can use their capabilities to render more inclusive experiences. And going on, speaking of latest and greatest, we actually have a whole area that's dedicated to AR, VR, and MR. And you'll see in the photo I have up here that there is not just Microsoft technologies, but you can see there's PlayStation controllers, there's a Vive. And we don't pretend that we know the best way to tackle every inclusive design challenge. It's important to us to see our partners and our competitors and how they're tackling these issues. We want to understand gaming and disability community and what they believe to be best practices, regardless of the platform. If another platform comes up with a great solution to something, we want to learn from that. So, it's our mini tour of the lab. But how did we get here? So making the Inclusive Tech Lab was not a straight line or a clear-cut process. It had a lot of growth, learning, and exploration. It evolved over time, and we definitely did not have a roadmap. So really, if we talk about where it started, it came with some inspiration. And that actually came from Able Gamers and their expansion packs. Able Gamers teamed up with Humble Bundle, SteelSeries, Electronic Arts, Jinx, and Corsair to create these packs of game components that could be donated to facilities and then made permanent fixtures. And they ended up in special needs daycare facilities, long-term living centers, and they were intended for patients who had multiple special needs, and it had assistive technology, special controllers, and obviously the most important thing, great video games. And one of the expansion packs was installed in a pediatric special care unit in Hopewell, Pennsylvania, and it went really well. It was a great success. They had a series of quad sticks like we showed, the adroit controllers, switches, all of that stuff. And that's not something that a lot of game devs see on a regular basis. So really the first stab at something like the lab was what we've now come to refer to as an arcade. Funny enough, I wasn't a Microsoft employee at the time, but I happened to be there. It was back at the Microsoft Ability Summit that they host every year. And in 2016, that was the first year they had game accessibility introduced into the speaking lineup. And Ian and I, along with another colleague, were invited to talk, which is why I was there. Now, for the arcade, there was a range of specialty controllers, simulators, and a bunch of information. Going through the pictures I have here, there's a setup from Warfighter Engaged on the left. They're a charity that works to make special setups for veterans who have become disabled. We have Brandon, who also works at Xbox, wearing motion-restricting gloves. We have Bryce using a quad stick that I mentioned earlier. And then we had some vision-reducing goggles. And this is just part of what was happening that day. There were many other displays, and like I said, a lot more information. But something I don't actually have pictured here is there was a version of the special effect context wall actually at this first arcade back then. And after the Ability Summit, I wasn't there for this, but the team took that setup and kind of did pop-up versions in what's known as the Commons, which is where all the restaurants are on the Xbox campus. So it's like heavy foot traffic, people go through there all the time. And that was great, but it was clear that it wasn't quite enough because it was temporary, it wasn't having the impact it really needed to have. And what really came next was opportunity. The lab was craving a permanent home, but they needed space for it. But where would it go? Luckily for us, there was actually like this workout area that was underutilized, and people were thinking of getting rid of it or moving it, and that was the key move. And because of the arcade and having it being carted around, we were basically working, by we, again, I wasn't there, the people who were still there were there then. They'd been doing all of this work to legitimize everything they were doing and showing it was important the whole time. And so they were able to show why it was deserved through the work that had already been done. And beyond the fact that there was a space opening up, it was really a matter of the right place at the right time. Not only was accessibility on the rise in the game industry, and it still is, there was also a culture shift that was happening within Microsoft at the time. So in 2014, that's when Satya Nadella became CEO for Microsoft. And after that, Microsoft revised its mission statement to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. But for Satya, accessibility is actually a personal crusade for him. His oldest son has cerebral palsy. And to quote him on Microsoft's accessibility work, "To work in accessibility has an incredibly deep Our work in accessibility has an incredibly deep meaning to me personally. Our family's experience has required me to continually hit refresh on my emotions and on my outlook, and it is in this constant quest for renewal that I realize, despite the fact we are making progress, we still have much to do quickly for so many." So fitting in line with Satya's goals and Gaming for Everyone's commitment is awesome, but it does take more than that. For us, we needed to get executive sponsorship, and we were lucky enough to be able to do so. Something like the lab does take grassroots efforts and needs people who care to do the legwork, but having support from the top down is also incredibly important. So for us, getting the executive was about 3 things, really. So number 1 was showing the need. People are learning from the arcades, but they aren't always around, they being the arcades, and we don't have a space to learn or explore or improve from what we had in the arcade. We needed to have a defined goal, we wanted to learn, and we wanted to innovate, Number three, but we had to know how to measure success. And success in this could be so many things. You know, the amount of people who visited the lab, which we kept track of for a while. The amount of inclusive design features that got shipped as a result of having inclusive design sprints in the lab. You know, the number of developers who just know one more thing than they did before. But you know, really, putting the lab together was an incredible journey, and we all learned so much along the way. And you know what? Looking back, some of those things really do seem obvious now, but at the time, not so much. And some other things, definitely not so much. So I just wanted to share with you what we learned in hopes that if you wanted to go and make your own lab, you don't have to learn the lessons that we may have learned the hard way. So I gave this talk before with one of my coworkers, Brandon, and I'm just straight ripping his analogy. So how many of you guys have seen those like pregnancy belly simulators? You know, those big weighted bellies? Okay. You know, they're there to kind of like teach us maybe what it's like to be pregnant. So I'm curious, has there anyone who has had a baby and thinks that that pregnancy belly is a good representation of what it's like to be pregnant? Yeah, no one raised their hand. Don't think anyone's surprised. So it's a simulator. We call that a pregnancy simulator. Why do we use simulators? Well, they give us a lens by which we can try to better understand some of the challenges of pregnancy. But that isn't the same thing as being pregnant. And really, the same goes for accessibility simulators. You know, we have goggles to simulate visual impairment, earplugs to simulate audio impairment, gloves to simulate fine motor control. And these can give you, you know, some ideas or maybe different thoughts on how to tackle certain challenges, but that will never accurately reflect what it is like to have one of those impairments. You know, one of the things that got hit on earlier today is, you know, what we do wearing a simulator for a little bit to get an idea will not be the same as what Cherry, who games every day, knows because she's already found these hacks because she's been that way her whole life versus, you know, I had this on for 5 minutes and it's whatever idea I thought of. No, like that's completely different. And so while we may want to use them to think creatively about product design, it's important that we don't use them to validate those designs. Validation should be handled by those who understand accessibility challenges firsthand. We should never be role-playing to validate disabilities. And this isn't something that we learned when we went to make the lab. We kind of already knew this. What was really important for us is making sure that people who came into the lab didn't think that wearing these simulators was an appropriate way to test their products. So that's why when we have people come through our lab, you know, we very much guide our lab tours and we have signs kind of explaining what it's all about. So for us, it was really important to teach other people, hey, just because we're showing you this stuff, it doesn't mean, oh, you can test low vision now because we give you a pair of goggles. No, it's not accurate. You know, the other thing we learned was sometimes authenticity can be intimidating. When we first started the lab, we had a very complex Rocket League demo. We were really trying to replicate some of those things that we were seeing on the special effects board. And we wanted to build what we were seeing so people could see that in real life. But, you know, for a developer coming in just learning about accessibility, it was too much. It was too different. It was too complex. We really needed to learn to back it up and make it more approachable. We basically learned that less is more. So, and really, that led to the Rocket League station we had, and we have a very similar one up now, the only change being the Xbox Adaptive Controller is powering it instead. In this setup, gas is on the foot pedal. Most people understand gas is go. The player steers left or right using two buttons that are located near your knee. So in this picture, it's the blue and green buttons. And the joystick that's on the arm of the chair allows you to jump. You know, Rocket League is, I almost say easy game, which is not true because I'm really bad at Rocket League. Rocket League has simple fundamentals that's easy to understand and fairly simple controls. So for this, having this demo station was much easier to use and experience. Now people would engage our setup rather than just kind of being intimidated by it. Something else we learned, that although people find this stuff cool to look at, we maybe didn't need to invest money in it. Sorry, I'm checking my own time here. There we go. OK. So on the left is the Adroit controller. It's made by Evil Controllers in partnership with Able Gamers. So that controller is $399 USD. For context, a 500 gig Xbox One S is $280 USD. So like, this is a really great product, and it is very powerful, but it literally costs more than the console. And it's a great controller, super expensive. We don't really use it in the lab. The quad stick, $399 for this version. It's not something we really have people demo. It's not really sanitary to have people put their mouth all over it. It's mostly there for show. And honestly, if you were going to buy any of the things I have up here, I would suggest it's the X keys. This box does a lot of powerful stuff. It's about $125, but we just don't really use it that much in the lab. And honestly, we really could have done it with just this. So this is a modified Mayflash arcade stick. And we had this before the Xbox Adaptive Controller launched. So it had been modified with additional ports. The joystick itself was $80. We paid a little bit extra because we had someone modified the additional ports. If you wanted to do this, there's now a walkthrough on how you can do it yourself. But we later replaced it with the Xbox Adaptive Controller. But this is what was powering our Rocket League demo. And a lot of accessibility people, or at least I know I do, have a love-hate relationship with regulations. And one of the things I want to touch on is our door. So when we built the lab, we were definitely going to be ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, compliant. And we set our door to 32 inches, as required by the ADA. And then we quickly realized that that wasn't good enough. Someone coming through who was in a large power chair, someone who is blind being escorted through by another person, someone in a wheelchair with an assistive dog did not fit through that door correctly. We had followed the guidelines, and it didn't work. So ultimately, we actually redid the entire door. It's now 47 inches wide with another 24-inch segment that can be opened as necessary. And actually, as single one-time costs go, this door is the most expensive thing in the lab because we went for compliance. And compliance does not mean a good experience. And we also put a bunch of thoughts into other things that we hadn't thought about before. So in the photo I have on the screen, you'll notice that we have dark carpet, and all of the furniture is fairly bright. So someone who is low vision will be easily able to identify where the furniture is. Also, all the furniture is really light. I can move most of it with one hand pretty easily, but at the same time, if I want to put my weight on it to lean against it, it's not going to go anywhere, which means that we can have it quickly move around for custom setups or different people coming to the lab, but it also means if someone needs to use that as a support, it's going to be fine. We also have special lighting, so we can adjust the color, the temperature, the brightness, and we actually have those lights connected to an automation system that can be controlled via voice. And that was just an extra cool thing that we thought of when we realized, because we know that sometimes lighting can be a problem. And we know our lab is far from perfect, which is why we regularly bring the community in the lab and learn from them. And we want the lab to be a more inclusive, more welcoming, more effective space for promoting the message of game design. And it's not an exaggeration to say that every time we've brought a community into the lab, we've learned something new, and that really fuels us. But also, we've seen some unexpected benefits from the lab that we didn't think were going to happen. So for example, recruiting just kept bringing people into the lab all the time. And we basically found out that new hires, particularly millennials, have expressed to us that they find out that the mission of empowering every person on the planet to achieve more is exciting. And the fact that our lab is kind of a representation of that is really engaging to them. And the cool factor of the lab has really given us opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. So up on the screen right now, I have a picture of Bryce and Evelyn with a gentleman from GameStop TV, and they did a whole segment on the lab, and that was featured in over 7,000 retail stores because the space is cool and it looks sexy. I mean, it's true. It's a sexy area. So now that you've seen your lab, I know all of you are clamoring to go and make your own right now, but you're like, Tara, I don't have any money. I don't have a budget. You know what? That's fine. We've got a few tips and tricks for you on how you can do something similar regardless of how much money you have. And you know what? We want to call out, if you don't have the budget for a dedicated space, you can do what we initially did and had an arcade. As we mentioned, arcades are the temporary setups of assistive tech, but that's fine. They aren't as ideal. You won't get all of the benefits, but you're still able to have a way to introduce people. It can be a good place to start if you can't secure a permanent location. And, I want to say, again, don't worry if you can't make a full lab. Having an arcade is just fine. That's actually what I did before I was at Microsoft. So I used to be at Gaikai, which was part of PlayStation, and it worked on PlayStation Now and the Remote Play app. I didn't have a budget, but I had people who were interested in accessibility, and I had a special occasion, the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And you know what? This lab was literally made from what I could gather in the office that day. So, I worked at PlayStation, so it was really easy to get some PS4s and Uncharted. I just asked Warfighter Engaged. I was like, hey, I'm trying to show some stuff for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Can you literally mail me a controller that I can just show people? And they totally did. I found a local speaker who was like, hey, will you take whatever swag I have in the office as payment for coming and just talking? They were like, great, I love PlayStation. One of my developers, Ezra, was actually colorblind. And so we just set up a station where I had my iPad on bottom running a game, and then another iPad above it with a colorblind simulator, and we had people playing the game through the top iPad, where Ezra was able to give context. One of my favorite setups is actually, in the upper left corner, there's a picture of people with headphones on, and one of the challenges we had, one of my developers had actually previously done tech support and had some blind clients who needed help, and he always talked about, like, for me, all of a sudden, I was the one who couldn't use tech. Like, she didn't have a monitor, and that's what I was used to. And he talked about how powerful that experience was. So we actually made a game out of it. So up at the top is actually a race to see who can get onto the office Wi-Fi using screen readers the fastest, which was great because it made people want to use the screen readers more so they could understand, because that's how you could win. If you could win, you'd get a cupcake. Everyone loves cupcakes. But you know what? A lot of it was DIY. And you know what? What you don't have, you should just ask for. Like, seriously. Even when making our lab, we didn't have an unlimited budget. Chances are, neither will you. But we were incredibly fortunate enough to have some of our amazing partners donate equipment to us. It's a win-win. And you know what? That means if you get something donated to it, you can take what you would have spent on that item and put it towards something else. And you know what? Speaking of getting donations, so you may have noticed that Shara is one of the sponsors of this conference. So Shara is actually me and Shane. Shane and Tara equals Shara. And we've been sponsors of the Game Accessibility Conf every year, and it's really just because when we live stream, we're like, hey, we're trying to raise money for the Game Accessibility Conference, and these are the people that donated from our community to help us be sponsors of this one. So I just want to give a special shout out to all of these guys for donating. So Trithon, Rich Lax, Fourth Room Brewing, Roby1 Kenobi, Sassy 4671, Soviet Miyazaki, Rather Be Drumming, Papa Finch, Deadhead, Roddy Gaming, Nomad, Digital Frost, Jarhead 1, Mobile Resin, Mommy Au Pair. Mommy Au Pair is indeed my mommy. So, another donation that's really important is time. So as an example, in the beginning of our lab, it was just run by about 5 volunteers for space, prep for events, managing tours, presentations, and that takes a lot of work. And although we now have Bryce to run the lab, like before Bryce was dedicated to it, it did take volunteers. You will find other people who are willing to help you. Just ask. Now, if you do manage to get some money, you do need to be smart about where you're spending it. So to be honest, I recommend spending it on PC and PC accessories, as this is where a lot of assistive technology works best. So if you're going to purchase items, again, don't dive into buying the really expensive stuff. Buy something simple. And if you're going to have issues pitching a standalone lab, you should really think about who to room with. So it'd be totally reasonable to share space with user research. If you build up an accessible gaming space and then you share it with user research, well, then maybe user research can have more gamers with disabilities come in because now you've built an accessible space. And when they're not using it, you can use it for other purposes. It's a double win. Honestly, another really good thing to invest in is a nice set of headphones. We have super sweet surround sound. I know not everyone's going to get that. Really good headphones can replicate stereo sound well, so get a nice set. And finally, find some great media on what you want to teach people about. We're lucky enough to have multiple demo stations, but if you only have one and some really good demonstrative videos, that could totally work. That could be enough. And you know what? Let's say you do get $1 bajillion. You've won the lottery, and you're deciding you're spending it on your own inclusive tech lab. The other things I really recommend, invest in making it a meeting space. Find every excuse you can to drag people in. Try to get someone to run the lab, because if you do a good job, it's gonna be popular. Again, if you have the money, get multiple demo stations. This other box I labeled make conscious decisions on your space, but what I really mean by that is we got to purposely choose the color of our chairs to contrast with the carpet. We know not everyone's gonna have the budget to do that, but if you have the budget, that's a great thing to spend it on. I listed, for us, it's ADA compliance plus plus. Please insert whatever the French, European, British equivalent is. Our door didn't work. We had to go beyond. Again, if you can get that surround sound, it's super sweet. Invest in it. And lastly, decor. Like I said, we get to use the room for a lot of stuff because it's sexy. So, find ways to make the room sexy so people will want to be in it, so they'll want to shoot videos in it, so they'll want to do interviews in it, all this other stuff. And I can't understate how great the lab has been. We've had the inclusive design sprints. This is actually a photograph from Mixer, where everyone is sitting around learning from one of the instructors during that course. And you know what? We're building stronger bonds with the community, and it has really helped us show that we care and given us a place to focus on the feedback that we've been given. And we originally were keeping track of what was happening with the lab. So from October 1st to March 7th, there was 3,455 total visitors, 380 separate events, all of this stuff. Well, honestly, by now, we've just quit measuring. There's a bunch of people who come to the lab. It's really popular, with over 5,000 visitors and over 100 students now. And you know what? The lab is public. We have people come to the lab. So if you are interested in bringing your group to the lab, you can email us, and then you'll become Bryce's problem, and then he can sort it out. But he will show you a great time, and he wants to. I know he does. He's over there like, Tara, why are you signing me up for more work? I didn't ask for this. But really, we made this lab to share. We want you to come see it. Accessibility isn't something that we should compete on. It's something that we should work on together. So please feel free to reach out to us. And, that's all I have. So, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, you can find me, later. I'll be around. And fair warning, if you do follow me on Twitter, there's a large number of untapped check-ins that will occur. So I hope you like beer and cats. Thank you.